You're listening to The Voice of Russia in London, and we're talking about David Cameron's Europe speech. So David Cameron has finally delivered his long-awaited speech on Britain's relationship with the European Union. If he is re-elected in 2015, he wants to renegotiate the terms of Britain's membership and then offer the British people a referendum on whether to stay in the EU under renegotiated terms or leave. Reaction has been mixed both at home and abroad. Polls show no jump in support for the Conservative Party, while the proportion of people who say they would vote to leave the EU has fallen over recent weeks. So is this speech a milestone in British history, or is it just an attempt to kick a tricky political issue down the road until after the next election? With me in the studio to discuss this are George Eaton, editor of the New Statesman's Staggers blog, Dr. Henning Meyer, editor of Social Europe Journal and a senior visiting fellow at the LSE, and David Coburn, London Region Chairman of UKIP. And on the phone we have Nikki Sinclaire, an independent member of the European Parliament and co-founder of the We Demand a Referendum party. So I'd like to ask our guests the following question. Will there actually be a referendum in Britain in some shape or form on EU membership? Nikki Sinclaire, this is your party's defining issue, so let's start with you. What do you think?
I think he's tried to be a Houdini and please all people, but I think history will show him to be more like Tommy Cooper. I think that he's done the prime ministers and governments since the 1970s have fed us on jam tomorrow when it comes to Europe, and I think this is another case of beating us jam that will never materialise.
George Eaton, do you think there will be a referendum in some shape or form on EU membership?
If David Cameron wins the next election, then yes. I don't think he will at the moment. I think a Labour victory is far more likely. But it's worth remembering that the coalition has introduced what they call a referendum lock. So the next time any significant powers are transferred from the UK to Brussels, a referendum will be automatically triggered. And Labour have said they would keep that legislation, and that could easily turn into an in-out vote.
Dr. Henning Meyer, do you see a referendum happening?
I don't know whether there will be a referendum or not, but I'm sure this kind of referendum that he outlined will not going to happen, because I don't think he will be able to renegotiate these major planks of policy that he seemed to indicate, like the Working Time Directive and other things governing the single market. So I think actually he got himself trapped in a paradox, actually, because it was all about bringing about British independence within the European Union. But basically, he's now given the decision out of his hand, because it's now dependent on the willingness of European partners whether they want to give him something or not. And I don't think there is a good case for any major renegotiation at all.
And David Coburn, what do you make of it? Do you think there will be a referendum on EU membership in the UK?
I think Cameron will do everything he can to stop it happening. He may try and organise some cosmetic changes. He's probably already choreographed something with Chancellor Merkel. I'm sure he wouldn't have gone ahead with this without some sort of hope of some pathetic crumbs being thrown from the table. But I would imagine that they'll be very insignificant. He'll try and get away with confabulating people and get them all confused. And but I don't think people are going to wear it. The UKIP polling has held up very strongly, according to today's Times, and the Conservatives are not gaining a great deal from this. And I think eventually Mr. Miliband's going to have to come to grips with the fact that UKIP are taking so many votes from him in the north of England that he better get it to grips with this and offer some sort of a referendum himself. I think that in the end, UKIP has forced this issue. UKIP have brought the establishment to the point where they have to offer something. And this is just the beginning. I think there's a sea change now, and Cameron's just kicking the can down the street as long as he can to keep his own party happy.
Well, I totally refute that last comment. It wasn't UKIP that did this. There was a big debate about 14 months ago in Parliament that followed a 100,000 petition, and that led to 81 rebels that really put this agenda on the map. And that was not UKIP's campaign, that was my campaign, the We Demand a Referendum campaign. And actually, that UKIP refused to become part of, and then its leader, Nigel Farage, publicly refused to sign that petition. And UKIP is trying to claim the credit for that. UKIP didn't want to play any part in that at all. In fact, 25% of UKIP members do not want a referendum because they fear losing it. And, I was in UKIP for many years, and that the arguments in branch meetings and even in the national conferences, they do not, 20 a good quarter do not want a referendum because they think they're going to lose it. UKIP have just jumped on this issue as a bandwagon.
David Coburn, is it the case that a quarter of UKIP members don't want a referendum on Europe?
That's absolute rubbish. And Nikki ran for leadership against Nigel, lost, and the members didn't want her.
No, I didn't.
And she was terrified of...
I never ran against Nigel.
No, she wanted to, though. But anyway, the long and the short of it is that...
You're full of rubbish.
Well, what's most important is that you can sign as many petitions as you like, but the only thing that makes the establishment sit up and take notice is when you threaten them. And when you see seats like Rotherham, where UKIP came second with a very high score, and Cameron is terrified of UKIP. He's not terrified of Nikki Sinclaire, with all the best will in the world.
What happens if Cameron does get re-elected but can't really wrest any concessions at all from the EU?
I mean, first of all, I think we will know way before the next general election whether there will be a serious renegotiation or not. I mean, it's just an illusion to think that in the next 2.5 years nothing major will happen in the European Union. There will be major change, especially in the Eurozone, and we will be knowing very, very soon whether there will be a serious renegotiation or not. And why I don't think there will be a serious renegotiation is simply the argument that you cannot have 28 different sets of rules for the soon-to-be 28 members of the European Union. You cannot govern a club like this. So there's only one way out that I can see, and I'm not sure whether he actually checked this with Angela Merkel, who herself faces an election in the autumn, which she might well lose. So the question is whether there will be a multi-speed European Union going forward anyway. The question will there be a second tier negotiated, where not just Britain but other countries feel comfortable, that sits alongside the Eurozone? That's the only way I can see where we can keep the club together and maybe give David Cameron what he seeks. But otherwise, there is no chance that a special deal for one country will be negotiated. We've had the euro for some time. We have the Schengen area. So a multi-speed Europe has been a reality for some time. Now it is about making actual, also the intellectual change and grasping this reality and designing a European Union with the Eurozone at its core and maybe an outer layer of countries that never want to join the euro. But very importantly, organize it in a way that these two tiers are not fighting each other, but they are complementary. And I think this is very well possible. That's the challenge for the European Union anyway.
But is there a kind of sense within the EU that reform in some shape or form is a good idea?
Yes, of course. I mean, I'm a member of the German Social Democrats Basic Values Commission, and we recently released a paper actually saying that we need to reform the Eurozone at its core, but also a tier around it. So every country feels comfortable. I mean, it is a reality that in the Eurozone now countries feel the necessity to integrate further to save the common currency, whereas other countries have different interests and might not feel so comfortable integrating further and further. So this is a reality, and there will be reform to reflect this. But what is not going to happen is that individual countries can just renegotiate and cherry pick what they want to do. And therefore, I think the approach from Cameron, doing it that way, just saying it's my way or the highway, that's a very risky strategy.
George Eaton, has Cameron got the tone wrong?
I think he's got the tone right politically. This is really just a holding strategy to get him through the 2015 general election. And he had to offer something to his restive backbenchers. He had to try and limit the threat from UKIP. And actually the response from the Eurosceptic Conservative MPs has been more favourable than a lot of people expected. I don't think this is going to make a big difference to the Conservatives' poll ratings, partly because polling shows that only 6% of voters think the EU is one of the most important issues facing Britain. If the Conservative Party wants to win the next election, which it has to do if Cameron's going to begin renegotiation, it needs to start talking about growth, jobs, public services, crime, the issues that really decide general elections.
David Coburn. UKIP is seen as a kind of single-issue party, isn't it, really, to some extent? But as George Eaton has just said, that issue is not really at the heart of what British voters actually vote on.
Well, certainly not. UKIP is not a single-issue party. We have a very good party programme. We want to have a new movement. We want a whole different idea. As far as I'm concerned, there are two parties in this country. There's UKIP, and the other party, and the other party consists of the Conservatives, the Labour Party, and the Lib Dems. They're all very much the same. You couldn't get a cigarette paper between any of them. They all want the same thing. They are the establishment. They go to the same universities. They never have a real job. They become MPs. It's a closed club. UKIP want to change that. UKIP are made up of real people with real jobs who want to see a change in the way Britain's run. We're fed up of being bamboozled, or the public being bamboozled by the major parties. We want to offer them a proper decision about the European Union, and the European Union is incredibly important. I think people do regard it important. You can see from Rotherham the change in the tone. In people up north are seeing that their jobs are disappearing. On the 1st of January, Bulgaria and Romania come into the European Union full time. You're going to have whatever part of 29 million people possibly arriving in the UK with the right to the health service, which I'd like to think is a national health service rather than an international health service. People are going to see if they want their bunions scraped or they want their whatever hospital operations. They're not going to get that if they're behind a queue of Romanians and Bulgarians. I don't blame the Romanians and Bulgarians. If I were Romanian and Bulgarian, I'd be coming too.
Dr. Henning Meyer, you want to come in here?
Yeah, sorry, but this is, I think, just scaremongering. I mean, the borders open not just in the UK. Hold on. The borders not open just in the UK, but also in the rest of Europe. And I think it's also an illusion if you tell people that people would come here just for social benefits. The social benefits are much higher in countries like Germany and France. So nobody comes here just to be on the dole. Also, if you compare it to the last enlargement round, when a lot of Eastern Europeans arrived here, there was a decision by the British government at this time not to have the 7-year transition period, which was the case in Bulgaria and Romania's case now, and is now also the case for the rest of the European Union. So I think this is just a scaremongering. And by the way, it's also not true that just 29 million people are sitting there just to invade Britain.
Well,
so this is simply not true. This is just scaremongering. I'm sorry.
Really.
You're listening to The Voice of Russia in London, and we're talking about David Cameron's Europe speech. With me in the studio to discuss this are George Eaton, editor of the new Statesman Staggers blog, Dr. Henning Meyer, editor of Social Europe Journal and a senior visiting fellow at the LSE, and David Coburn, UKIP's London region chairman. And on the phone we have Nikki Sinclaire, an independent member of the European Parliament and co-founder of the We Demand a Referendum party.
I want to go back and talk about the renegotiation. President Schulz, the President of the European Parliament, last week said in a press conference in Strasbourg that renegotiation is not possible. And remember, to have any real renegotiation of the treaty, for example, social chapter or something, you need unanimity. Every other country must agree. And that is just not practicable. The UK pays in something like 53 million pounds a day into the European Union. And we're the second largest contributor, way behind Germany, but still the second largest contributor. Countries such as Spain, Greece, Ireland and the Eastern Bloc countries are net takers. They are no way going to want to renegotiate the position with the UK. So the only choice that we really have is a straight in or out. This renegotiation portal that David Cameron has built up is absolutely ridiculous, and it's just to kick it into the long grass. You know, we are only a one-issue party, and we will appeal because there are many Conservatives.
But that issue isn't really important to most British voters.
That's why. No, we're talking about a European election, not the general. We will not be standing in the general election.
You're just a spoiler for UKIP, but we're going to get a referendum anyway, Nikki.
Sorry, I patiently listened to you.
Sorry.
Please.
Okay, but I want to ask a question here. Sorry, excuse me, Nikki. The polls on voting intention, were there to be a referendum, have narrowed dramatically. A couple of months ago, there was a strong sense that British people, if they were asked the question directly at that time, would say, yeah, let's get out. But now the latest polls are 40% would vote to leave and 38% would vote to stay. You may demand a referendum, but there's no clarity on the outcome.
Absolutely. And let me tell you our position on why it's so different from UKIP and why we're not a spoiler to UKIP.
Briefly.
We believe that this issue is such important. We're in a terrible halfway house with Europe. We're neither fully in nor we're out. And actually it's against our national interest. And that's why we believe there needs to be a referendum and a clear-cut decision. And we must respect that decision. either stay in or stay out. And UKIP just wants to leave, and they don't care what the British people say. If the British people say to stay in, UKIP would still be there arguing. Let's have a referendum and accept that.
So, David Coburn, where would that leave UKIP if there was a referendum and Britain voted to stay in?
Well, the Nikki's party is just a Nikki ego party, really. Sorry.
Oh, ridiculous. Absolutely ridiculous and insulting. There are many people in the
David
party...
Coburn, could you just answer the question, please?
Could you repeat it, please?
The question is... Sorry, Nikki Sinclaire, I'm going to have to come in here. The question is, if there was a referendum and Britain voted to stay in the EU, where would that leave UKIP?
Well, we continue fighting to leave. I believe that if the people did decide that, then obviously they have the right to do so. But I would think that they were wrong. And I would continue to fight to get out of the European Union, as I'm sure with UKIP.
But surely the party
every 5 years.
Yes, possibly.
The party would be stuffed, surely.
No, not particularly. I think I think there's a very good chance that the European Union is going to implode before then, anyway.
George Eaton.
One thing that's worth remembering is that Britain had an in-out referendum on the EEC, as it then was in 1975, and voted 67-33 in favour. Actually, that didn't settle the issue, as we see now. And actually, at the 1983 general election, Labour went into the election promising withdrawal. And so I don't actually think that an EU referendum in 2017 would settle the debate forever, because the Eurosceptics in Cameron's party and UKIP would say, Europe's changed, at some stage in the future, and would ask for another referendum.
Okay, but that might be in another 40 years' time, right? I mean, that's a significant...
Events, dear boy, events, as Macmillan says. Times change. The European Union could go into nosedive. The euro could explode, which I think it probably will do as a former currency broker. I can tell you that.
Dr. Henning Meyer, is the euro going to explode?
No, it's not going to explode. I mean, I don't think the currency traders, they might try to make it explode, but so far they have not had much luck in bringing it about. But the thing is that this is a very important point about the general sense or the reasoning for referendum at all. Will it settle the debate? No, it doesn't. We've already heard from UKIP they're going to bang on about it regardless. So they're going to call for referendum every 5 years like a general election. You're always with the argument something in the European Union has changed. This directive we don't like, that directive we don't like. So this is a completely new deal. Also the argument that the referendum was in the 70s on something completely different. All the way, every single treaty was signed by the British government that was elected by the British people, just like the governments from any other EU member state. So you could already see that this is not gonna resolve the debate in one way or the other. And by the way, that's not just UKIP. That's also the Tory backbenchers. They don't want to have a renegotiated deal and then stay in. They want out. And as long as they don't get it, they'll go on arguing this.
So who, in your opinion, looks better? David Cameron has played a populist card, if you like, by at least chucking the idea of a referendum out there. Miliband has said he doesn't want one. After the kind of initial reaction, who's going to turn out looking better?
So at this point in time, I think it is definitely Ed Miliband who's in the best position. I mean, just think the scenario. If Cameron gets a serious renegotiation, which I don't think is possible, then he's in a good position. Then he can say, well, I've wrangled something out of the European partners that they were reluctant to give, and then he can put it to a vote. But if he can't get anything out of it, which I think is likely and which will be known before the next general election, he's weakened. The old divides in the Tory party will come back. And Ed Miliband said, well, I didn't promise an in-out referendum at this point of time because there were too many ifs and buts around. We don't know what the deal would be. We don't want to create years of uncertainty, especially if there's a weak economic recovery or the triple-dip recession on the way, as we know since this morning. So, and he could say, well, and the only thing he did is isolate Britain with its partners in the European Union. And I'm the man who can actually repair the damage because this government has discredited itself in the club. So I think if this scenario comes about, and I think this is more likely than the other one, I think Ed Miliband has called the right shots.
George Eaton, what do you think? Miliband looking good?
I think he is, actually. Ed Miliband is a leader who often defies the conventional wisdom, and he's often been underrated. And I think in this case, actually, Ed Miliband thinks there's quite a good chance that he'll win the next election, and he's right about that. And he doesn't want to promise an in-out referendum now and have the first few years of his premiership dominated by that issue. He'd actually much rather focus on the economy, on public services, on helping Britain to recover from austerity. I think he's right in that choice.
You're listening to the Voice of Russia in London, and we're talking about David Cameron's Europe speech. How important do you think personal poll ratings are? Because although there's been no real poll jump for the Tory party as a whole after Cameron's speech, Cameron himself is going up. He's seen as being strong and decisive and good in a crisis. How important is that?
Yes, that is important, actually, because often the personal ratings of leaders are a better long-term indicator of the election result than the voting intentions for the parties. The question is whether it's a temporary shift or a permanent one. I still think it's the economy that will ultimately determine the outcome of the next election. And as we saw this morning with the negative GDP figure for the final quarter of 2012, the Conservative Party is not in a good place on that issue.
David Coburn, given that some of our guests are saying that Cameron will not be able to get any concessions out of the EU, and we will know that before the next general election, where does that leave UKIP, do you think?
Well, I think it leaves UKIP in a very good position as the only proper anti-European party. I think we will take a lot of seats at the next election. I think the Labour Party, contrary to what the gentleman said about Miliband, I think he's not very good. He's never held a real job in his life. Another hereditary Labour Party aristocracy. I think he doesn't go down well with the working class voters who are disillusioned with Labour. They're not going to vote Tory. They're going to be looking for a new place to go, and they're going to vote UKIP. And you're going to see the rise of UKIP.
Do you think Nigel Farage chimes with working class voters?
Yes, I think he does. He's the man in the pub. He's the man that they can relate to. They can hardly relate to Call Me Dave or Mr. Intellectual Hampstead Miliband with all his woolly ideas and who's never had a job in his life and had George Lansbury around for tea when he was a boy.
And what are the prospects?
Can I come in at some point?
Yes, Nikki Sinclaire, please.
Well, so there's many different things there. You've obviously gone 2-3 questions before I last spoke. But firstly, Nigel Farage is not like any man that I see in the pub in Birmingham or Liverpool. So, he's
out more,
very much
Nikki.
a city spirit. You say 6%. I would say it's a bit higher than that. But even if it is 6%, in the general election, 6% is a very huge number. It can make the difference between you have an absolute majority or a coalition or, losing an election altogether, as the last election was quite tight. So
are you hoping that your party will be a part of a coalition?
No. Well, I've already said we're not standing in the general election, so we're not going to be part of any coalition. We are not standing in the general election. You wouldn't let me explain our position earlier, which, if you'd allowed me...
It's a very confused position, Nikki.
The position that we are going to do, and please let me finish so I could explain our position. We will stand in the European elections only. We're not standing in any other election, only the European election in every single region, and we will have on the ballot paper, we demand a referendum. It will be a clear statement for people to vote on. This issue has been a cancer in politics now for 30 years. It's about time we dealt with this once and for all.
Dr. Henning, Meyer, you want to come in here?
I mean, how do you want to bring about a British referendum from the European Parliament?
We don't. That's not the idea. The idea is a lobby. It's a protest vote to send a message to the professional politicians. The European Parliament is powerless. That's not the point. It is a lobby vote. It is a protest vote. It's able to say, look, you don't have to support a fully fledged political party like UKIP. You can have a protest but still be loyal to your party.
It's nonsense, Nikki. You have to have people in the House of Commons voting to get out of the European Union. It's utterly pointless, protesting all you like. You can burn as many bras as you like. It won't make any difference.
Hang on a second. UKIP does not have a single MP after 20 years. The Greens have got an MP and they were elected to the European Parliament exactly the same time as Nigel Farage. So UKIP has failed where the Greens have succeeded.
Well, I don't know. In Rotherham we came second, 20%.
George Eaton.
Come second, you might as well come
George
last.
Eaton, I want to ask, in the next general election, given the sort of personal enmity between David Cameron and Nigel Farage, and yet the spectre of UKIP doing relatively well, how do you think things are going to play out? Is there the possibility, for example, of a coalition there?
Farage has ruled out any sort of deal with the National Conservative Party. However, he hasn't closed the door to local parties making deals in particular seats, so not running against, say, Conservative MPs who support withdrawal. I do think UKIP is a much bigger problem for the Conservatives than it is for Labour. I mean, they are taking some votes off Labour, but the polls show they're taking far more votes off the Conservatives. There were 20 Conservative Labour marginals at the last election where the UKIP vote was bigger than Labour's majority, and I think actually UKIP will help put Ed Miliband in Downing Street.
Henning Meyer, do you think that UKIP has the power or the ability to subvert the idea of a referendum between a renegotiated relationship with the EU or out to a simple in-out referendum on things as they are now or out?
I mean, we've heard before that actually this referendum is meaningless for UKIP because they want out. That's it. So, and if you could get a vote for an out vote, you wouldn't need a referendum, would you? So. Therefore, I think we've established something very important, that whether you have a referendum or not, this issue is not going to go away. So what's going to happen over the next few years or so is that the argument for Europe has to be made properly. And there are an awful lot of myths around there, especially about the economy and what the relative dependence is. I mean, it should be very obvious that if the terms of trade worsen, the UK will have worsening terms of trade with 26 export markets, and amongst them 4 out of the top 5, whereas vice versa, each of the 26 only has deteriorating relations with one export market, albeit an important one. So I relish the opportunity that over the next few years there will be an opportunity to discuss the topic of Europe, and as you've seen, once the argument actually focuses on Europe, the opinion polls change as well.
Can I also say that in Germany is now Britain has overtaken France as Britain's greatest trading partner in Europe.
Yeah, but that's only a one-to-one relationship.
Yes.
You would have worsening relationship with Germany, yes, France, the Netherlands, Ireland, and all the other countries.
I don't think Germany wants to sell less Audis, less whatever Volkswagens over here.
But Germany is much less reliant on exports into the UK than the UK is reliant on exports into the rest of the European Union.
Britain needs to be out of the European Union in order to do free trade deals with the emerging markets in Asia. We need a new Elizabethan age where we actually do business wherever business is, not be strapped to this sclerotic European corpse which is going down the road. And all you have to do at the moment, Germany is going to be left as a sort of colonial power, propping up countries like Greece and Italy and Spain, and that's just going to destroy the German economy. We'll be out of it. We'll be doing business with Asia, with China, and making a lot more money.
That's obviously not true. Thank you for saying this, because that's my favorite UKIP myth, actually. That the European Union membership is actually somehow preventing you from exporting or trading with the rest of the world. Look at Germany. Look at how much Germany exports to China and India and South America. EU membership does not prevent you from doing so. If you don't do more trade with the rest of the world, it's because the services and products are not there.
I think better free trade deals between Britain and the rest of the world. We can negotiate our own free trade deals. Will be a lot better. You have the same deal that Germany has now.
You have exactly the same deal that Germany has now, and you're performing much less.
I love you dearly, Dr. Meyer, but we must disagree on this one.
Okay.
I want to finish by asking our guests if they believe Britain will still be in the EU in 10 years' time. Dr. Henning Meyer.
Well, I hope so. I mean, I think the European Union is stronger with Britain in it, and Britain benefits from the European Union as well. But after all, I mean, it's a decision that has to come out of the political process. I hope so, but obviously there is a chance that this is not the case.
David Coburn. Will Britain be in the EU in 10 years' time?
We'll be definitely out.
Nikki Sinclaire, what do you think?
I think the political situation is inevitable that the UK will be out of the European Union or whatever that may be in 10 years' time. That's regardless of UKIP or anyone else. I think the situation is inevitable that the UK cannot survive in the European Union long term.
George Eaton, are we in or are we out?
I think we're in because I think people feel there's enough uncertainty around without us plunging off the cliff and pulling out of Europe. So I think the people would side with the status quo, as some may say, the devil they know.
I'd like to thank my guests, George Eaton, editor of the New Statesman's Staggers blog, Dr. Henning Meyer, editor of Social Europe Journal and a senior visiting fellow at the LSE, David Coburn, UKIP's London region chairman, and Nikki Sinclaire, an independent member of the European Parliament and co-founder of the We Demand a Referendum party.